We take you from Mombasa, Kenya to Mozambique, where during a working visit to that country, the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa highlighted Mozambique's growing significance as South Africa's leading economic partner on the continent. Ramaphosa was in Mozambique to deepen cooperation in various sectors such as energy, infrastructure, transport, tourism, agriculture and mining. He also indicated that Pretoria is committed to growing a mutually beneficial partnership with Maputo. For more on this, we joined on the line by Nokwanda Maseko, a senior economist at the Trade and Industrial Policy Strategist known as TIPS. A very good afternoon to you, Nokwanda. Welcome to Africa in Business.
Thank you for having me.
So Mozambique is South Africa's largest trading partner in the SADC region. How are the trade relations between the two countries? Would you describe them as mutually beneficial?
Firstly, I wouldn't really say they are the biggest. I think they're like the second biggest in terms of imports, second biggest in terms of exports, or maybe third biggest. And I think that's actually important to point out because of what's been happening, especially with exports over the last few years, which is that there's been some exports moving from South Africa to Mozambique, which are actually destined for China. And that has been skewing the trade data and making it look as though we're suddenly exporting more to Mozambique. And for me, it's important to point out because, as I'm saying, it's skewing the trade data and therefore making us reach conclusions that are not actually true about the state of our trade with the country. But yes, I think in terms of is it mutually beneficial, that comes back to what do we mean by mutually beneficial? I think each country is obviously getting as much from it as we can get at this particular point, given the differing state of our industrialization levels. So when we look at what we're getting from Mozambique, for example, a lot of it has to do with natural gas, a lot of hydrocarbons that we're getting from that country, and those generally tend to go to Sasol for their petrochemical production. And then what we're sending to them, what that really goes to is, in terms of our manufacturers, would be goods, vehicles, and there's some back and forth trade of electrical energy there. So that's something to do with ESCOM. So is it mutually beneficial? I think, both countries are doing their best in terms of whatever production capacity and trade capacity that they have, in terms of also trying to supply the other country with what's needed. And electrical energy is obviously one of the important things for industrialization. And so I think in that sense, it would be considered to be mutually beneficial. But again, we're industrialized at different levels, and so it's not always going to align perfectly.
But each party has something to contribute to the relationship. You've touched on some of the areas and the sectors for bilateral trade. And President Ramaphosa did indicate that South African businesses continue to see Mozambique as a priority destination. Investments are in numerous sectors, but what are the opportunities that exist for increasing this bilateral trade? And which of the sectors do you believe stand to benefit the most? And I think the point that you made earlier on, in response to my first question, was actually really quite key, because the eventual destination of those goods also matters. So it's also around consumption of South African goods in Mozambique, as opposed to Mozambique being used as a thoroughfare to another destination.
Yeah. What we're seeing from the trade, I think what we are supplying to Mozambique really is around automotive products, so especially goods, vehicles. So that would be lorries and trucks and stuff like that. And then the other areas where there is also some trade would be in the line of, what we're sending to them around the lines of capital equipment, so pumps that are used in different industries. And I think there is still room in there for South African business to benefit, in the sense that as Mozambique industrializes, they're also going to need some of the capital goods that are coming from South Africa. Some of them are manufactured locally, some of them are assembled locally and going into Mozambique. So there's some benefit there. But I think one of the pressing ones would probably be around the benefit to South Africa's agriculture. And some of what we're seeing there, we are actually exporting some maize to Mozambique, as well as some cereal flours, excluding wheat, for example. And so I suppose it would depend as well, do we need a new market for those kinds of crops, any agricultural products, and would Mozambique be able to take, some of that excess, what would be excess supply at that particular point, given the sort of trade relations with the U.S. right now? But again, yes, in terms of opportunities, it would depend on how much the country is able to take in terms of their own domestic consumption, and not just for re-export to other countries. And I do think that requires additional analysis, because what we know right now really is around sort of the trade in some of the bigger stuff like automotive components, some of the stuff around steel, for example. Those are just some of the top line items. But I think as the country industrializes, as I was saying before, I think there's probably going to be demand for bigger value items. And so there's opportunity there.
You speak about Mozambique's industrialization. I'd like us to spread the net a little bit wider, if we may, and look at SADC industrialization and what role the South Africa-Mozambique trade relations plays in supporting the industrialization of the region as a whole, and what importance the Maputo corridor has in achieving that.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're coming at it from like a sort of South African perspective, just looking at the geography of Mozambique and South Africa, Mozambique is the gateway to the rest of the region, in the sense that, if you take the N4 all the way to Komati-Port, you get to the border with Mozambique. If you're taking Libombo, it's the same thing. And for South Africa, that has actually enabled us to sort of find a workaround around some of the infrastructure issues we've been having with rail. So Transnet, for example, has an agreement with the Maputo Ports Authority that lets Transnet, move some of the ores that are meant for China. We actually move them via the port of Maputo. And it's the same for the other countries within the regions, especially those that are landlocked. They're able to get their goods to market and get some goods from market via the Maputo corridor. And if you're looking at some of, for example, the benefits that are obviously going to be coming from South Africa being being the biggest economy in the region, and then also looking at sort of the logistical issues that Maputo or Mozambique help to address, I think those two countries particularly then play a big role in trying to help the industrialization of the region, just in terms of making sure that there are some of the necessary equipment coming in. Obviously, whatever is imported that is going to the rest of the region, in some cases comes through via South Africa, and then some of it would then be taken via the Maputo corridor. So those are some of the things that obviously are beneficial to South Africa, to Mozambique, but also to the rest of the region. There are some other SADC infrastructure projects that are happening in that corridor that are also going to be beneficial. But I think also, if we think about it in terms of energy provision, we know Mozambique is very big in terms of natural gas provision, and some of that comes to South Africa. Some of it goes elsewhere within the region as well. So I think there is definitely benefit for these two countries, but for the rest of the region as well, just being able to get their goods out to market and knowing that there is some logistical infrastructure that can be used for those purposes, I think is important.
Right. So let's cast the net a little bit wider now beyond SADC and maybe look at South Africa specifically and its export relations. When we look at the latest trade data coming out from SARS, it does show that European demand and high precious metal prices are offsetting trade pressures from what really is a worsening trade deficit with China and perhaps the new US tariffs as well. And with that in mind, what is the impact of South Africa's decline of exports to destinations like China, to the domestic economy? Or is this purely a function of trade issues between South Africa and the United States?
I would actually say it's a function of South Africa's commodity dependence and how the sort of movement in commodity prices then affects our ability to collect export revenue as well as then have a functioning economy. So we saw during, at the height of COVID, for example, mineral prices went up and we suddenly had the biggest trade surplus we've seen in a lot. Actually, I don't even think we had seen that big of a trade surplus. And as the prices go down, we are then seeing that, our actual export value is also going to be going down because the prices are not the same anymore. But China does remain our strongest trading partner. We still get a lot of products from them. We still send a lot of our metal and other mineral products to them. And are we going to be able to close that trade deficit? I don't think so. I don't think so, and I think it is something we need to be honest about in the sense that China is, in and of itself, its own economy, first of all. And we need to be cognizant of that. It's a very big economy that we'll never be able to compete with. Unless by some big miracle, there's like a very big unlike COVID, increase in mineral prices, we're just not going to be able to close that gap. And that ship has sailed. Do we see the sort of decline in mineral prices as a problem right now? I mean, yes, it does affect our ability, obviously, to run our economy in terms of funding the socio-economic services we need to fund. It affects how much money we have for building hospitals, how much money we have to support small businesses. But do I think it's a concern right now? No, I don't think so. I think it's just the nature of the world economy normalizing back to what it was before COVID, but also now what then makes an impact also is the movement with the U.S. I think we're all trying to figure out what it is exactly that they want and what it is that, they can give to the rest of the world, and no one at this particular point is sure.
Yes.
So we don't even know exactly what some of the effective tariff is at this particular point.
I think that is the state of flux, really, as far as global trade is concerned. Everybody watching to see what is the next U.S. move, and how sustainable is it, and will it change the next day? So there really isn't a level of market certainty at the moment. But Nokwanda Maseko, thank you very much for your analysis of this particular relationship between South Africa and Mozambique, but also just the global trade picture for South Africa in relation to Europe, to China, and indeed the United States itself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. That's Nokwanda Maseko, a senior economist at TIPS, which is Trade and Industrial Policy Strategies.